7.56 miles, 9 minutes, 16 seconds per mile, 159 beats per minute on average, according to the Coros Apex. Now, normally I like to go for a couple of runs at least before I even make a first impressions type of video. But I thought, you know, those videos end up being really long. So I thought I'd break it up, make it a little bit smaller, kind of take you along with me as I'm experiencing this new watch. It's my first time using a watch from Coros. And in terms of disclosures, this is a watch that I purchased with my own money. In fact, a lot of it was purchased with Amazon affiliate money. So the links that are down in the description below don't cost you anything, but do help me out quite a bit. I use some of that money to be able to defray at least part of the cost. The rest I did supplement with my own money, but no one's paying me or going to be reimbursing me for the cost of the watch, and no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So the disclosures out of the way, let's talk about this first run in the Coros Apex. Now the Coros Apex is kind of like their middle tier of watch from Coros. This is my first Coros watch that I've ever run in. It's a brand that I've been very curious about. They seem to be doing a lot of things right, at least in social media. So I thought it was finally time for me to give it a try. And coincidentally, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, Coros also just recently announced the Pace 2, which I will be talking a little bit about in terms of the difference between that watch and this watch. Although for this video, it won't really be all that important. For this video, the two watches are actually pretty similar, if not coming out with the Pace 2 being better or more fully featured. So let's get into that. So the Coros Apex is a 46mm watch. It comes in two sizes, 42mm and 46. I elected to go with the 46mm watch. It's got pretty much all the sensors you can ask for. GPS, heart rate monitor, barometric altimeter, compass, gyroscope, accelerometer. It's got it all. So any of the things that you might want to track during your run, it can. It also now, like all Coros watches, has the ability to give you power from the wrist. So you don't need a separate foot pod to be able to do power. But if you do want to have a separate foot pod, and I usually do, it also has full stride compatibility as well. So really impressed with the firmware update that they just pushed out to increase and make that kind of full compatibility an option in the Coros watch. But then also at the same time, if you don't want to use a stride foot pod or any other kind of foot pod, Coros makes their own pod. You can just get that power number from the wrist. And I'll be taking a look at some of that data in this video. The fit of the watch is really nice. The rubber or the silicone kind of wristband that comes with it, very nice and comfortable. A little bit on the thin side, but very comfortable nonetheless. The watch is extremely light. That's kind of like my biggest first impression of it. The screen is nice and bright, very readable. Not quite as like inky in terms of the blacks and dark colors like you might think if you look at some of like their press images, but definitely very readable, especially in bright light. In fact, it almost looks better in bright light to me than it does in dim lighting. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but I'm very happy with especially like these kinds of lighting conditions where things are like super bright. I'm definitely very happy with my ability to see this watch. Now the other feature that I think is a gigantic plus for this watch, even though it's so lightweight, is that it claims to have a really epic battery life. Now I've only had the watch for 24 hours total and I've only gone for one run in it, but it's telling me that I can have up to 35 hours in the 46mm version, 35 hours of GPS tracking time, and up to 30 days of standby use time. So pretty much that tells me that I can use this thing for almost 3 weeks and not have to charge it a single time. That's just absolutely insane. Other things that are important to me are that there are only 2 buttons. I kind of wish there was a third, maybe even a fourth button. I think that would be really useful. The main way that you're interacting with this watch is with a jog dial, but you're going to use that to scroll through the different menus. If you've used an Apple Watch before, you're already pretty familiar with that kind of way of scrolling. And there's no touch screen on this one. So you can touch it all you want. It doesn't do anything. I'm completely fine with that because I don't really like touching my watch faces. So even other watches that I'm wearing, like this that I'm using as a reference to compare some data, the Polar Grid X, I don't really ever touch the touch screen. I use the buttons to be able to navigate through the menus, and I prefer working that way. This only has 2 buttons. It hasn't really been an issue so far. The jog dial, or whatever they're calling the crown, does get a lot of use. The other only button that exists is the back button. So you're going to use that to scroll through the menus, and you're going to press it to select or hit OK or to cycle through menus. In terms of what you're looking at, there are some configurable watch faces, and you can use the Coros app on your phone to pick up more watch faces. There's not like an infinite number. There doesn't seem to be like a store or a place where people can like submit their own watch faces, at least not that I can tell. And there's a variety of them that are all just kind of like equally uninteresting or not that useful. I really didn't find one that I liked, so I kind of went with the default. I find that except for like the Apple Watch, I just don't care about customizing the watch faces. They're either like way too much data or not customizable enough with the data that I want. Apple Watch, watchOS does a fantastic job with the complications of me being able to cram in a lot of information in a way that looks great to me, that is useful to me, and I can customize all the different parts. Garmin, Polar, Suunto, Coros, all the watch faces, it's like you can change between one of a finite number of different watch faces, and you can customize a data field. Not all of the data fields that might be on the watch face, but one. That's kind of like how it gets limited. It's pretty frustrating, but it's pretty par for the course for these types of watches. When it comes to running, the data fields are configurable there too, and there it's much more useful. I feel like the default fields do a good job of showing me here are a couple ways that I can lay out data that I might want to look at myself, but you're definitely going to want to go in and customize what you're looking at, whether you're focusing on heart rate, intervals, so you're doing like pace and distance, or where you're focusing on power, or you want to look at all those things or just a handful of those things. You can definitely make a very complicated data face for running, or you can make a very simple one. Very easy to do, very straightforward, and something that I would recommend for people to do if they have this watch. So let's take a look at the data that we actually got from this watch just to compare it and to lay it all out there. This is a $350 watch versus a watch that's a little bit more than $350 in the Polar Grid X, plus a $200 foot pod, plus I think it was a $60 external heart rate monitor. But that's kind of what I consider my gold standard in terms of all the different kinds of sensors, plus external sensors, to be able to pick up this kind of data. But I feel like it's a good baseline to see how well does this $350 watch do. So the first thing I'll take a look at, I'm gonna grab my laptop for this. The first thing we'll take a look at is power, and I wear both of these watches on the run for today, so that way I can track the data. And in this instance, when I'm looking at the power, I feel like the Coros Apex did a really good job of keeping track of the power. It does seem like when it came to really high intensity activity, the numbers were almost identical. And for the most part, the peaks and valleys are lining up. But I am finding that the Coros, in terms of rating these numbers, seems to be a little bit higher. Now, when it comes to heart rate, this is something where I don't think any watch can really match up to a chest strap heart rate monitor, and that's definitely the case here. We could see in this one that the Coros is doing well for like the first 10 minutes maybe, and then after that I think I'm getting sweaty. The watch is sliding down my wrist. I was constantly like kind of shifting it back down, trying to get it a little bit away from the wrist bone so I can get a better reading from it, but it would then just kind of slide back down again, and then so the heart rate would spike. So I'm not getting a very clean heart rate tracing from the Coros Apex at all, but it's about what I would expect from any wrist-based heart rate monitor. Then let's take a look at cadence. And in this situation, what I think I'm seeing is that it looks like the Coros is overstating my cadence by just a little bit. It seems to be kind of like consistently off by the same amount. The peaks and valleys are kind of all lining up in the same spot. So like I'm thinking that both numbers are pretty close to each other, but the Coros does seem to be overstating it just a bit. Next thing I'll take a look at is distance. By distance, both of these were very, very close. They were off by a very small amount, and we'll get to that kind of like full number at the end, but the two lines are almost identical. Here's where things get kind of a little bit interesting, is that both of these watches have barometric altimeters, and it looks like the Polar watch here is the one that's overstating, saying that I'm about like 5 to 7 meters higher than the Coros Apex is saying that I am. But again, it's a situation where for both of these watches, like the peaks and valleys and the distance between those two seem to be pretty constant. So like they're off by a set number, it seems. But in terms of like it knowing, did I go up a hill that was a certain number of meters, I think both of them are capturing that same kind of delta, if you want to think of it that way. In terms of GPS, here's a couple of looks at the GPS tracings from both of these watches. And I actually think that the Coros might be doing a little bit better of a job in terms of where I actually was on the street. And so here's some of the final stats coming up here. In terms of the overall distance differences, the Coros had me at 12.13 kilometers total, and the Polar and Stride combo had me at 12.24 kilometers total. So not a ton of difference, 0.1 kilometer difference over 12 kilometers. So I feel like that's pretty good. So that's the data in terms of how it stacks up. So this watch by itself doing pretty similar in performance to what this watch plus a whole other host of sensors are able to do. Here are some of the things that I haven't reviewed yet. There's a compass in here, and there's gyros and accelerometers. So I'm assuming all that goes together to work on some route navigation. I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but that'll be coming up in some videos. So hit the subscribe button to see how that works. And on that note, that's something that I think separates it from the Pace 2, which is a much cheaper watch than the Apex, although it does have a lot of similar features as well. I think it actually has more sensors, the Pace 2. I think the Pace 2 also has a thermometer, which the Apex doesn't. It does give me a temperature reading on the watch. So I don't know if it's pulling that from like when it's tethered to the phone. I'm not actually sure where that's coming from the Apex. Another feature that I'm very keen to try out, I don't know if it's a really good feature or if it's just a gimmick, I'm looking forward to that, is they have a special track mode. It's a special algorithm, they say, that makes it much more accurate when you are doing intervals or repetitions around a track. So that's something that I'm also really looking forward to try. And the other thing that this watch doesn't have is it doesn't have any music, which it depends on which brands you're working with. Some of them at this price point might have an option for like Spotify integration, some of them don't. So it's not something that I particularly look for when I'm looking at a running watch. So it's not like going to be a deal breaker for me, but if it is for you, then this watch isn't going to be for you. But overall, I'm pretty impressed with what this watch is offering at this price point. $350, it's pretty compelling in terms of all the sensors you're getting, the level of accuracy that you have, and just its general usability kind of right out of the box. That's my thoughts so far for now, after just the first one, a very preliminary video on the Coros Apex. Let me know if you have any questions about the watch so far. I'd love to keep the conversation going in the comments down below. That's all I have for today's video, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?